means that you other guys, your SPs, you can release this set of attributes to this IDP, because this IDP, for instance, in Sweden, you could say this IDP is part of the sort of government or a government organization, which means that you could actually release the social security number IDP. But in other cases where you have another type of IDP, like a commercial one, you wouldn't want to do that. So there are policies around sort of attribute releases, for instance, that you won't be able to enforce. And there's no way to do that if you do dynamic registration according to the OpenID Connect standard. So that was where I started. So I wanted to have a way of allowing dynamic registration, dynamic provider configuration discovery, but I also wanted a way to enforce policies such that not just attribute release, but that the federation operator could say that from now on we use SHA-2. There is no one who is going to not even publish that you can do SHA-1 because it's not allowed. Or you can say that at the access token endpoint you have to use this authentication. Things like that. So that was sort of nice, but how do you do that then?
Or just if you're, what about if you're just membership? Like, is this OP or RP allowed to join?
Yes, exactly. So that's also part of it, precisely. So I started then with this idea that you have a metadata statement, and the metadata statement is actually a set of metadata statements, one placed inside the other. So I had this sort of picture at one presentation. I had these three parties. You have the federator operator, you have someone representing the organization. I picked the IT architect for different reasons, but we can just use it as an example of someone who is responsible for within an organization, or actually sort of responsible for having the communication between the organization and the federation. And then within the organization, then you have a system administrator, which is actually running the service, which is running the IDP, the OP, or running the RP. So you start off with having the federator operator having a key pair, private and public key. The public key is in some way published. It's not defined in the proposal how you do that, but there are several ways by which you could do that. Then the IT architect in this case, so this is sort of the organization responsible person, starts by constructing a metadata statement which contains some information that is common for all the entities that of a specific, well, either all the entities within that organization or all the entities of a specific type within this organization. It sends that document which also then contains the public key of the IT architect to the federation operator. The federation operator checks that this information is according to the federation policy. And it then signs the information, if it's okay, and sends it back to the IT architect. And this is now this piece here. So it's a signed metadata document. Now the system administrator now wants to spin up a service, so he has a public key pair, and he starts constructing one of these metadata statements, which now contains the specific information for that entity. Like if it's an RP, it must be redirect URIs, but it could also be like grant types, subject type, and things like that. It will also probably contain pointer to where the keys that the entity is going to use in the future communication with the OP, where it's located. So the system administrator sends this document to the IT architect, who looks at the information and checks that it's according to the policy of the organization. And if that's the case, it places the statement that the IT architect had sent to the federation operator and got signed into this document, and then it signs the complete document, which then contains the signed metadata statement that happened between the IT architect and the federation operator, the public keys for the entity that came from the system administrator, and so forth. So that's the complete document. Now, when the OP gets this, what is it supposed to do? Well, it has the public key of the EF of the federation operator. So it can check a signature, but it can only check the signature of the innermost metadata statement, which is the one that the IT architect sent to the federation operator and got back signed. So it has to unravel. It takes the complete document that it got, and as you know, it's in JOT. It's a signed JOT. And you can look at the body in a JOT before you have before you checked any signature or done anything to it, because it's there in clear text. So you can unravel that, and you can get at the metadata statement that was constructed by the IT architect and the federation operator. And that document, then you can check that signature by using the public key of the federation operator. Once you've checked that signature on that document, you have the public key of the IT architect, which you then can use to check the signature on sort of the outermost document, which was the one that the system administrator constructed and that got signed by the architect. So that's how you verify a complete metadata statement, which in this case contains sort of one metadata statement which was contained within another. There's no boundary in the specification as to how many of these there could be. There could be just one, there could be two, there could be three, there could be four different levels. It's up to the federation and organization or federation or organization to decide how many there would be. Now eventually, when you've done all this checking, you will end up with two documents, one which contains all the specific entity parameters, and then you have sort of the organization-wide information, and then possibly other information that the federation operator had added. So what you want to do then is construct the complete metadata statement, all the parameters, and you do that by sort of adding these two together. And there are rules for doing that, such that if there is some parameter in the document that was signed by the federation operator, that takes precedence. So if there is scope, for instance, defined at this level, then the system administrator cannot add anything to the entity's metadata statement that defines a wider scope than when the federator operator had defined. You can define something which is more restricted than what the federator operator defined, but you cannot make anything that is wider. So if one tries to do that, you have to make that's an error. So you have to say that then. So that's the creation of metadata statement and also how you would use them.
And there could be a metadata statement for the RP and the OP. They both would have different metadata statements.
Yes. And if you have two RPs, they will have different metadata statements.
Okay.
A RP and an OP can also be members of more than one federation. So if we go back here, so the IT architects send this document to one federator operator, but they actually send them to more than one. So he would end up then with not just one signed metadata statement, but more than one. It could be any number. So the eventual document could contain, could sort of refer to several federations. So an RP could then, when an RP talks to an OP, the OP can, well, actually it's the other way around, because the OP is the first and will publish so where it belongs. So it will tell the RP by including metadata statements which federations it is prepared to work within, you could say. So if one of these federations then, or more than one federation, if the RP is members of the one or more federations that the OP is member of, the RP can then say, okay, I prefer that we use one of these, and then eventually sort of normal way that client registration works is that the OP finally decides, okay, we'll pick this federation in this case. So part of the provider discovery and client registration is also finding out which of the possible federations that could be used that they are eventually going to use.
So the client might present different, maybe two different JOTs, one signed by one federation, one signed by a different federation, and then the OP might look at those and say, okay, I'd prefer the federation one and use that one?
Yes.
Okay.
That's basically how it will work. So because that was also one of my design issues, was that I have this belief that when we go further sort of into the future, we will, well, actually, it's turned out already, I think, that it's in the SAML federations that having just a very limited number of federations is actually not a good situation. I think there are lots of big international projects that have problems because of that. So if it were easier for them to create their own federations in parallel with, for instance, country federations, country-based federations, that would sort of make it their life a lot easier.
Yeah,
so
and we see that in the U.S. too. Like not everyone wants to join InCommon. Within a state, there's a Texas federation because not all the Texas institutions wanted to join InCommon. Sorry, David, you were going to say.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's no surprise coming from me because I've heard it before. But actually, I think even then the consumers of metadata may even not pick one metadata statement, but take information from more than one. Because I think as we go forward, we're gonna have different organizations certifying certain things about entities, that they meet certain requirements or something like that, and not all federations will support all certifications. You know, the early ones are assurance certifications and things like RNS and CertFi and things like that are coming out of the international R&E federations. And so you an OP might say, okay, well, I know that In Common will certify this RP for for RNS, but Switch will certify it for CertFi.
Yes. Well, actually, I haven't thought about that, but that would actually, as long as they don't.
This to a large degree was behind that post I made a few months ago after you and I talked at TechX, and it was that it's going to be hard for any aggregator to aggregate everything that will be needed for all transactions. Right. In fact, ultimately, I think that's impossible. So actually, entities are going to be doing their own aggregation as well.
Right. No. What I was thinking about was that as long as sort of if sort of an OP and an RP have three different federations in common to each other, and sort of they have different policies, but if policies don't clash, if sort of the policy is that, for instance, is certifying that some specific RP is of a specific type, then sort of course, if one federation does that, it doesn't clash with what the other federation says, because it's different namespaces, you could say.
Yeah.
But of course, if they had something within the policies that actually would clash, then you shouldn't be able to do that. But as long as they don't do that, then it's...
Yeah. But even the notion of what a clash is might be a local interpretation of what the policies are. So, yeah, I mean, I also like Leif's idea of these oracles that are aggregating things, and they're therefore going to be dealing with default in ways that you would expect a lot of entities to like, and and so that reduces the burden on these on entities to do their own policy determinations and things like that. And frankly, once you start pushing things out that far, then a lot of them make mistakes, I think, and don't really do it the way they think they're doing it. So I think that having aggregators is very important, but that you wouldn't want an architecture that forced aggregation.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Roland, can we actually take a glance at the spec, because there's some, I was looking at one of the questions that we've had about federation in OpenID Connect is there a stable identifier for the RP? Because we know there's a pretty good one for the OP. We have the discovery configuration URI. But there's been this problem of client IDs are always issued. You know, you could one client could have different client IDs at two different OPs, and in SAML we have this entity ID which allows us to correlate. But you know, as I was reading the latest version of the spec, I was noticing that the first section is talking about new metadata, or new, what would be the right word? I guess metadata for entities. And could one of those be used for, or will one of those be a natural fit to identify the client? That's one of my questions.
Okay. So we had a discussion at the workshop that is within the SHAN project at the workshop in Helsinki in October, I think it was, or November. Either way, one of the things what was raised there was exactly that, because the people needed that for doing accounting and things like that. Another issue that also has been raised a number of times is sort of what to do about entities that misbehave. How do you kick them out? And sort of how soon would you be able to do that after sort of an event, an incident? And actually, so I thought about this, and I actually wrote a mail to this on our mailing list a couple of days ago with the proposal that would probably allow sort of a fix to both of these, and that would actually depend on basically the organization having a globally, well, actually it doesn't really have to have a globally unique. It would be nice if it had a globally unique identifier, but then the entity would also only need to have a identifier which is unique within the organization. So those two identifiers together would be globally globally unique identifier for the entity. This wouldn't be any, well, one of the things that were brought up at the Helsinki meeting was that could the client, the RP then, use that identifier when it did the client registration and say, I want this client identifier. That is actually allowed according to the standards to say that. The client may propose, the RP may propose which client ID that should be assigned to it. I don't know if there are OPs that actually allows that, but in this case, I don't think it really matters. And I would say that as long as you have sort of a globally unique identifier in the metadata, the OP could easily keep a log over sort of which client identity it is assigned to which sort of unique client identifier. Built on that, having that functionality, you could imagine something like a blacklist or a whitelist that the federation operator would hold. Then that could be used then to sort of check is sure, this entity has metadata segment that is signed by this federation, but is it still okay to talk to it? In which case you could check with the federator operator. So is this entity on the blacklist or not? You could also imagine, sorry.
I was going to say, what about the signed JWKS URI? Because wouldn't that be consistent across, would the RP always have that? And would that should be consistent across registrations?
I don't know. I think it's, I'm not sure it will be that. So I wouldn't bet on it. I would rather use something else that is defined as being unique and supposed to be unique.
So what you're saying is that maybe there's nothing that says that we can't have a registration parameter called entity ID, and maybe we should just introduce something like entity ID?
Yeah. I haven't added that to the document. This was just an idea that I brought with the Qian group. I haven't gotten any sort of feedback from the group yet, whether they think the idea is good or bad, but it would actually solve sort of two of the problems that we've seen, which is, as you said, sort of you really want to have a stable identifier that you can use over time, and that would be sort of okay, so the same between an OP and RP, possibly also between an RP and different OPs, but not necessarily.
Okay.
Because, yeah, and it's when sort of when you wanted to kick someone out, because otherwise you would have to wait until all the signature had timed out before you could do something. And if you want to keep that time very short, it would mean that probably that the OP, when it did the client registration, it would set a pretty short time on the client registration, like perhaps half an hour or something like that, which meant it would have to do client registration quite often, which is maybe cumbersome.
Right. How would when a client, let's say, is a member of a federation and they're registering at an OP for client credentials, is it possible today? How do they present the federation metadata JWT?
It's the parameter. It's attribute value in the client registration. So it's when it does the client registration, it will present a number of attribute values in the client registration request, and one of them has to be return URIs, for instance. Another one is then added to be metadata statement. Actually, it's metadata statements because and also the possibility to actually either send the metadata statement or give a URI where it could be fetched.
So is that, so under dynamic registration, is there an existing parameter to send that metadata statement, or is that added in the federation or that's yet to be determined?
It is in the draft. It's added sort of as part of the draft. Yeah, there isn't any parameter you could use, which is
okay. So I'm looking at the draft. So metadata statement URIs would be added to registration, and that's how you would post it.
Yes.
So so when we spoke, I think at IAW, I was mentioning, so what the federation operator, in order to participate in this type of arrangement, needs to, one, publish its public keys at a minimum,
Yeah.
and then needs some way to process and return these metadata statements.
Precisely.
And but maybe you could talk about, like, how would you, what are some of the requirements you would see for the federation operator in order to be able to fill out that side of the equation?
So the federation operator, in my view, has two important roles. One is, of course, to be the trust anchor, right, which is sort of it has a root key, or keys you would probably say, sort of the key for which everything is hinged on. That is very important. The other thing is, of course, that the federator operator stands for something. If you can be a member of that federation or not is dependent on the policy that the federation operator has sort of. So it has to enforce that. We talked about at this work sort of building tools for doing this, and one could imagine this happening in very different ways. You probably would have something like ticketing system or something like that. So the organization, the IT architect, if we still use that sort of role, would have probably OAuth protected or something like that interface to which it could send new metadata statement requests sort of for having them signed. And then the federator operator on its side then would get this statement. Could be some post-processing, which could be automatically, but then you probably would have to have some person eyeing over, sort of looking at the actual information and saying that it's okay. Some of it could actually probably sort of automatically be checked by some software, but some of it must, I guess, must be looked at by a person before it gets signed and sent back. This is, I mean, I'm just guessing now. We'll see sort of where this ends up in the future.
Right, or publish blacklists, you mentioned.
Yeah. Yes, exactly, precisely. I also think that the federation, I actually sort of have another idea that has been circulating in my head really, and that is actually to do something like the PGP style of sort of I know you and you know the guy, and therefore I have some trust in the other guy, to have federations sign each other's keys and use that.
For organizational keys or personal keys?
Well, the federation operators' keys. So there will be, if you could, I mean, the federation operator could publish and say that I know about the federations and I trust these guys and I sign those keys.
Right.
They're sort of public key, and so if you want to have sort of a collection of keys that you can use, and if you trust me, sort of this is the collection.
Right. So I'm in common, and I say, oh, here's Edugain's public keys, and you can verify so that it gives you extra confidence that these are really Edugain's keys, because in common's telling you, look, these are Edugain's keys that I know about.
Precisely.
Yeah, it is. It's very much like the Edugain model. It does. It's then a forced aggregation. It would be an entity that didn't trust some federation that in common trusted then would have to not trust in common. But I think that this gets back to that issue of aggregators and the policies that they have for their aggregation.
And in SAML, there's distribution of metadata, like so you can replicate your metadata to multiple points. So,
right.
You know, one of the issues that I think federations help address is if, let's say, an organization's compromised and their signing key is somehow compromised and they need to update their signing key. So how would this, in SAML Federation, the federation updates its metadata with the latest keys. But in your model, the federation has signed this and sort of sent it off. Have you thought about that, or or am I missing something? Is it not as much of an issue?
No, it might very well be as much of an issue. So we're back then to there's nothing like a key revocation mechanism in my proposal. So what the federation would have to do would be that it to sort of restart, reset sort of everything, you could say. So it has to send a new metadata statement to the federation to get it signed. It has to create new metadata statement for all the entities within the organization and get signed. It will take some time, but eventually sort of change will percolate all down to the entities.
So maybe the federation operator might want to notify, and might want to keep a record of, and say, well, I know, actually it doesn't really know who, because the federation signed this metadata statement, returned it to the RP used it to register, so the federation operator doesn't really know who got that. So it's up to the RP to tell all the OPs, right?
Yeah. Well, or the RP has meta. Well, yeah, or that's. Well, yeah. One solution which probably wouldn't really work would be that the RP's entity ID could be, in that case, sort of blacklisted, such that they would have to get a new entity ID and start all over.
Right.
But then you would lose history, which might not be okay. I don't know.
Okay. One of the we had Ian Young on, I think, right before the break, and one of the things he mentioned was how MDQ or MQP, Metadata Query Protocol, has been out there for a long time and has really like been gotten slow adoption, and that one of they kept simplifying it in order to sort of encourage adoption, but I guess the one thing that scares me about your spec is that when you talk about the keys of the IT operator signing the metadata statements for the relying parties, that's the part that really scares me. Is like it seems to be introducing a new kind of complexity. How would those keys be managed and stored by the organization, or would the Federation help out with that at all? With these new, individuals who are basically controlling these keys, or are those organization issued or Federation issued keys for those middlemen?
I have always imagined that it would be an organization matter to deal with that. At this time, if you don't trust that, it's still possible that you use the same model, but you don't have the delegation anymore. But you go directly from the entity, from the RP or OP, directly to the federation and register that. I have some federations I talk to who want to do it that way because of their business model.
Yeah, and just even thinking about like SSL certificates. So I know in InCommon they have a agreement with Komodo to manage SSL certificates, because even managing SSL certificates turns out to be quite a challenge. So I wonder if the Federation operator might be better off doing a little identity management.
It could well be. I mean, I know there are some national research networks like who has hardware crypto stuff, which they actually sort of provide for their customers. So you could probably use something like that, sort of. So it wouldn't be the organization that kept the keys; they would just use the service that the NREN provided for them for doing this.
Right. Yeah, that might lower the barrier a little bit for an organization participating in this, and also provide them some protection, because that's a new identity management flow, the issuance of those keys, and that's really like difficult for organizations.
I see that sort of, but yes, I think that this trend that the NRENs seem to be taking more and more an active in what's happening within organizations, like sort of, as I said, providing them with key signing encryption facilities.
Yeah, or even DocuSign is sort of an example.
Right.
It's become really hard for organizations to set up CAs, and I guess get DocuSign to do it, which doesn't really seem as secure to me in a lot of ways, but DocuSign does all the right things that you need in order to set up a certified CA.
Yeah, I didn't know that. But it seems to me that you can talk about better and better protection for keys, but eventually you need to know how you're going to react to a compromised key, and so you probably want to deal with key rollover, because over the years you want the keys to be bigger, and you want to get rid of weaker keys. And the notion, I think the notion that you have to do that by changing an entity ID isn't good, because the entity IDs are probably going to be tied to attribute release policies and things like that that would be distributed all over the place.
So yes, so entity ID, I think you don't have to sort of mess with that if you do key rollover. Doing key rollover is absolutely within sort of the confines of what the
I think you're right. Yes.
The problem is the key. If you lose your keys, then sort of that's a completely other ball game.
Right. So the an RP could re-register, let's say, updated keys as part of key rollover.
Right.
But in a rush, if the keys were compromised and you wanted to get a quick notification to your partners, that's
exactly. That's exactly it. This is sort of a timing issue. How long can you go sort of using something which is compromised before sort of it's gone from the system? Is half an hour okay, or does it have to be like 2 minutes, or what was sort of the limit? It's probably different in different contexts.
Or could it be a week? Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Do the metadata statements, they have a validity period, I assume?
Yes.
So in some sense, that's the maximum that such a statement could be out there with a compromised key.
Right.
But probably long, right? Well, I know. What do you think about what would be the length?
To be honest, I don't know. I think, as I said, I think this is context dependent. So in certain contexts, you really want to have this very short, and very short, and like in my head, sort of half an hour or something like that, or 15 minutes possibly. But that puts quite a lot of work sort of on the other entities in the system, so it might not be.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually why in the blog post I wrote, I suggested that you might want just a real-time protocol that allowed you to check with whoever was certifying the metadata to say, is this right? Do you still agree with this?
So that's why I postulated this blacklist sort of service.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one interesting.
But I guess it wouldn't have to be a blacklist as such as just a way that you could absolutely get the current stuff. You know, sort of the DNS thing, where usually when you do DNS queries, you get cached results, but you do get information in the response that lets you actually start at the root servers and come down and you know.
Well, in this case,
get authoritative information.
Right, but in this case, what happens is that if you talk about an RP doing client registration with an OP, at that point in time, the OP can look at the metadata statement and he sees whether it's valid or not, still valid or not, or if there's time out. But if it says that it's still valid, it has to decide. The OP has to decide how long is this client registration going to be valid, which is a completely different matter. So it can decide, it probably should decide something which is within sort of the time limit, the validity of the metadata statement.
Yeah, you know, 2 days or 15 minutes sounds too short to me. You know, in OpenID Connect, they talk about 2-day key rollover for client or for OP keys.
Yeah.
So I would think 2 days might be somewhere between 2 days and a year.
In Commons, validity period right now is 2 weeks for SAML metadata for the aggregate, and the group that's looking that well actually just finished up with looking at the per metadata said it was not necessary to change that. Just because the stuff's being served up more real time. Although the interest there was maybe to be able to have changes take effect more quickly, and so you might want to shorten up the validity period so that if somebody made a change, you know it got propagated out more quickly.
Right.
And I think that's going to be desired coming up, but not quite yet. And the processes right now, because there's a manual review of entities that are submitted, there'd need to be some new process put in place to shorten up that review period before any kind of reduction in the automated expiration made any difference. So, yeah.
I also think that sort of, I mean, there are some discussions within healthcare community sort of about, well, here in Sweden anyway, possibly also about this, and there sort of the security issues are very different from sort of at the university, where if you get access to a service or not, it's not life and death. It
Right.
may be a bit of money, but or I don't know.
You know, one
yeah.
I'm sorry, David, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. No, yeah.
I was going to say, so you know, the just staring at the spec right now and looking at metadata statement URIs, the Federation could host that.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the design criteria for this is that it doesn't matter where you get the metadata statement. It could be anywhere.
Yeah.
Because it's self-contained.
Right. So I could see, you know, it could be if you're, so right now we have, I think the federations provide a lot of the functionality, and it's hard to go from that model to a much more autonomous model, I think, for the parties. But if the federation played a more active role, and it was helping to issue signing certificates to the people at the organization, and was then hosting the URIs, understood the content of the URIs, could publish that information in other forms, then I think this would be easier. One more point about the issuing the keys is that these are like the new formats, the JWKS format.
Right.
These are hard formats for companies to deal with. We've been dealing with that too. Like our developers, like they have trouble like generating these new. There's a million certificate formats and key formats anyway, and we just added some new ones, and the tools don't all support those. So if the Federation could help sort of with that management and also publishing of the metadata statement URIs, then maybe it would be an easier transition from the current like very centralized Federation operation.
I mean, if you want to provide something like MDQ, that would definitely be the sort of what the Federation operative would do. In which case, it would like to have sort of all the different metadata collected by it, so it can provide that kind of service.
Yeah. So the organization is really just doing more of the management and interacting, and the operational burden is reduced on the organization.
Right. I mean, another sort of reason for the Federation operator to actually collect information about the entities in this specific case, well, either way, but one is, of course, how do you deal with when the user comes to a service and wants to get redirected and authorized by some other service, like how do you find that?
Discovery.
Like the wave, discovery, like the wave function you had with sort of what's the equivalent in OpenID Connect. The ones that are supported are using WebFinger. That's part of the standard. That may not be sort of the ultimate solution. So probably you may want to do something like what you do with SAML waves today, in which case, if you wanted that to work, you have to do something like collecting and sort of having the federator operator actually having the information.
Right. Well, that's what we've been proposing, is to put the data in some type of data structure that would be easy to query. An MDQ is interesting, but it's a very sort of limited protocol in what queries you can actually express. It's mostly like, you know, an entity ID, you get back a metadata.
Yeah. I totally agree. But sort of, as I said, sort of my design criteria was that these metadata statements are self-contained, so it could be any, and you can get them from anyone, and you could sort of check their validity and all that disregarding where you got it from. So whatever sort of other types of services like Wave or something like that, or service discovery for that matter, because this could actually be used also for resource servers.
Yeah.
Not RPs and OPs, but resource servers actually. I mean, there are proposals now for metadata for those guys. So
yeah.
you could actually do something like this on top of those. So,
Right.
so there are several different sort of services you can build on this, and it would just depend on sort of this specific metadata statement construction that I invented.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't really considered that, but it's true. Other like generic OAuth protected APIs and discovery, like maybe I want a list of all the calendar servers or something.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Well, we're right at the top of the hour. That was really super helpful for me, Roland. So thank you for starting our year off in the right direction. We have tons of work to do. It's sort of daunting, but I feel like we're going to make some progress this year. I think we're going to proceed on the assumption that we're going to use this, and we'll let you know how we do. Does anyone else have any more questions in the last minute before we break? Roland, I forgot to ask you, I recorded this. Actually, I hit record and it wasn't working, and I then later noticed it actually was recording. Is it okay if we publish this to the group?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
Thanks. All right, so if no one else has any other questions, thank you again, Roland. Good work on the spec. It looks like you guys have been doing a lot of hard work on that. And
thank you. Thanks for having me.
So okay, all right then. Thanks everyone, and I'll send out minutes sometime later today, and I'll eventually upload this to YouTube, and I'll put a link in there too. So all right, thanks everyone.
Okay.
All right,
Bye-bye.
talk to you next week. Bye.